The Hōryū-ji Temple in Japan, built in 711 AD, still stands using wood preservation techniques that required no chemicals. Medieval European carpenters used 5 different methods to make timber last centuries. Modern pressure-treated lumber fails after 20 years. The difference is understanding wood, not fighting it. In Nara, Japan, stands the Hōryū-ji Temple complex. The main hall was constructed in 711 AD using Japanese cypress. That's 1,213 years ago. The wood remains structurally sound. No rot, no significant insect damage, no synthetic preservatives. Just wood that's outlasted empires, survived wars, and weathered over a millennium of seasonal cycles. Across medieval Europe, timber-framed buildings from the 1200s and 1300s still serve as homes, shops, and public buildings. Their massive oak beams show minimal decay despite centuries of exposure to rain, humidity, and temperature extremes. These structures weren't built with modern chemicals, pressure treatment, or synthetic coatings. They were built with knowledge. Today, we treat lumber with copper compounds, borates, and chemical cocktails, pressurizing them deep into the wood fiber. We're told this protection lasts 20 to 40 years. Medieval carpenters made wood last 500 to 1,000 years using nothing but understanding of materials, careful technique, and natural treatments that cost almost nothing. The medieval methods weren't primitive approximations. They were refined technologies based on centuries of observation about how wood behaves, why it rots, and what prevents that decay. Here are the 5 techniques medieval carpenters used to make wood essentially rot-proof, and why modern building has mostly abandoned knowledge that demonstrably works. Medieval carpenters began preservation before the tree was even felled. They understood that when you cut a tree determines the properties of the resulting timber. Winter-felled timber was preferred throughout medieval Europe. Trees cut between November and February, when a sap flow had stopped, produced wood with minimal moisture content and lower sugar levels. This wasn't superstition. Modern dendrochronology and wood science confirm that winter-harvested timber is more dimensionally stable and less attractive to fungi and insects. The reason is biochemistry. During growing season, trees transport sugars through their sapwood to fuel growth. These sugars remain in the wood cells. Fungi and insects feed on these sugars. Wood cut during active growth is essentially preloaded with food for the organisms that cause decay. Winter-cut timber, harvested during dormancy, contains less available nutrition for decay organisms. The difference isn't dramatic enough to make wood immune to rot, but it's the first layer in a defense-in-depth strategy where multiple techniques combine for remarkable longevity. After felling, medieval timber underwent extended seasoning. Not the kiln drying that modern construction uses, which can take days. Medieval seasoning took years. Oak beams might season for 5 to 7 years before use. The slow drying allowed internal stresses to equalize gradually, preventing the checking and splitting that creates entry points for moisture and decay. The seasoning process also modified the wood's chemistry. As timber dries slowly, certain compounds migrate toward the surface and others break down. Research on timber from medieval structures shows that slow air drying creates a more stable surface chemistry than rapid kiln drying. The wood develops what modern scientists call a case-hardened exterior that resists initial moisture penetration. Medieval builders also understood wood species selection. English oak, the primary construction timber in medieval England, contains high levels of tannins. These compounds are mildly toxic to fungi and insects, providing inherent resistance that soft woods lack. Japanese builders preferred cypress for similar reasons. Natural oils in the wood repel insects and inhibit fungal growth. This isn't accidental. Medieval carpenters over generations observed which timbers lasted and which failed. They noted patterns. Oak beams in church roofs remained sound for centuries, while pine deteriorated faster. Cypress temples stood for a millennium, while other woods required replacement. The knowledge accumulated through observation without requiring scientific explanation of tannins or antimicrobial compounds. The Japanese technique called yakisugi, or shou ban, dates to at least the early 1700s, but likely existed centuries earlier. The process involves charring wood surfaces to create a protective carbon layer. The traditional method bound 3 planks together vertically to form a triangular chimney. Fire lit at the base drew air up through the channel, creating an intense updraft that charred the interior surfaces uniformly. After the desired char level was reached, the planks were separated, cooled, brushed to remove loose carbon, and often treated with natural oils. The physics and chemistry of charring create multiple protective mechanisms simultaneously. First, the carbonization process consumes the cellulose and sugars on the wood's surface, the very compounds that fungi and insects feed on. The charred layer is essentially sterile from a nutritional standpoint. Second, the carbon layer is hydrophobic. It repels liquid water while remaining somewhat vapor permeable. This prevents the sustained moisture conditions that fungi require for growth while allowing internal wood moisture to escape gradually. Third, charring changes the wood's surface geometry at the microscopic level. The carbonized layer creates an irregular, porous structure that's mechanically resistant to boring insects. Beetles and larvae that normally tunnel into wood find charred surfaces difficult to penetrate. Recent studies at the USDA Forest Products Laboratory tested yakisugi treatment against decay fungi. Charred wood samples showed significantly lower weight loss due to decay compared to untreated controls. The level of protection varied with char depth. Deeper charring provided better protection, but even light charring reduced decay rates. Europeans used similar techniques, though less systematically than Japanese builders. Fence posts were commonly charred at the base before setting them in the ground. The portion below soil level, where moisture and fungi are constant threats, received fire treatment that extended service life from perhaps 5 years to 20 or more. The practice persisted in rural areas into the early 20th century. American farmers charred fence posts routinely until chemical preservatives became readily available in the 1940s and 1950s. Studies from the 1920s documented that charred posts lasted 3 to 4 times longer than untreated posts in direct ground contact. Modern revival of yakisugi focuses on aesthetics. The dramatic black finish appeals to contemporary designers. But the original purpose was entirely functional. Buildings with charred siding in Japanese fishing villages and farming communities routinely lasted 80 to 100 years with minimal maintenance. The technique worked not because it looked good, but because it fundamentally altered the wood surface in ways that prevented biological attack. Medieval structures often incorporated wood preservation into daily life through building design. Smoke from cooking fires and heating circulated through roof spaces where timber structural members were located. This wasn't accidental. It was deliberate preservation strategy. Smoke contains hundreds of chemical compounds, many with antimicrobial and insecticidal properties. Phenols, cresols, and various organic acids deposit on wood surfaces exposed to smoke. These compounds create an environment hostile to fungi and insects. Medieval great halls with central hearths and roof vents designed to channel smoke through the roof structure exemplify this approach. The massive oak trusses supporting these roofs absorbed smoke compounds for decades or centuries. Analysis of timber from medieval roofs shows surface deposits rich in preservative compounds. The technique has ancient precedents. Fish and meat preservation. Through smoking works by the same mechanisms, depositing compounds that inhibit bacterial and fungal growth. Medieval builders extended this principle to structural timber. Smoke treatment provides benefits beyond chemical preservation. The heat from smoke circulation dries timber, reducing moisture content below the threshold where fungi can grow. This dual action, chemical protection plus physical drying, creates conditions where decay simply can't establish itself. Scandinavian builders used a more intensive version called smoke baking. Timber was stacked in smokehouses and exposed to continuous smoke for weeks or months. The deeply penetrated smoke compounds provided long-lasting protection. Buildings using smoke-baked timber in Norwegian stave churches have stood for 900 years. The limitation of smoke preservation is penetration depth. Smoke compounds mainly affect surface layers. For large timbers, the interior remains untreated. But since rot typically begins at surfaces where moisture and oxygen are available, protecting the surface adequately protects the timber. Modern replication of smoke treatment faces practical obstacles. Building codes don't accommodate smoke-filled roof spaces. Chemical smoke flavor for food processing uses different compounds than natural wood smoke. But the principle remains sound. Smoke compounds demonstrably inhibit wood decay. Medieval ships required extensive wood preservation. Hulls constantly exposed to water would rot quickly without treatment. The solution was tar and pitch, natural products derived from pine trees through pyrolysis. Pine tar production involved heating pine wood, roots, and stumps in oxygen-limited conditions. The heat drove volatile compounds from the wood as liquid tar. This black, sticky substance became the primary wood preservative for maritime applications and many others. Ships' hulls received multiple coats of tar mixed with pitch. The treatment soaked into surface wood and formed a thick, protective layer. Water couldn't penetrate the tar barrier. The phenolic compounds in tar actively inhibited fungal growth. Ships treated this way remained seaworthy for decades. The same materials protected terrestrial structures. Tar-treated shingles, siding, and foundation timbers lasted substantially longer than untreated wood. The cost was minimal. Tar could be produced locally from available pine materials. The labor requirements were modest. The results were proven across centuries of use. Linseed oil provided another preservation option. Produced from flax seeds, linseed oil penetrates wood fiber and polymerizes on exposure to oxygen, creating a somewhat waterproof layer. Medieval builders used it extensively on furniture, doors, window frames, and interior woodwork, where tar's appearance would be unacceptable. The preservation mechanism of linseed oil differs from tar, but proves equally effective. The polymerized oil fills wood pores, excluding moisture. It doesn't provide the strong antimicrobial action of tar, but the moisture exclusion alone prevents most decay. Japanese temple builders used camellia oil for similar purposes. The oil, pressed from camellia seeds, penetrates deeply and provides lasting protection. Analysis of wood from ancient temples shows oil penetration to depths of several millimeters. The treated surface layer has resisted decay for centuries. Modern wood science validates these traditional treatments. Research published in preservation journals shows that natural oils and tars provide decay resistance comparable to many synthetic preservatives. The difference is application frequency. Natural treatments typically require renewal every 5 to 10 years, while modern treatments claim longer intervals. But the longevity calculation changes when you consider total lifespan. A timber treated with tar every decade for 500 years requires 50 treatments. Modern pressure-treated lumber might need replacement after 20 years. Essentially, 5 complete replacements over the same 500-year period. The medieval approach proves more economical over long time frames, despite more frequent maintenance. Perhaps the most sophisticated medieval preservation technique was preventing water exposure through intelligent joinery and building design. Wood doesn't rot in the absence of moisture. Medieval carpenters designed structures that shed water rather than fighting decay after water penetration occurred. Mortise and tenon joints, the primary connection method in medieval timber framing, were designed with water management in mind. The mortise, a rectangular cavity cut into one timber, received the tenon, a projection on the joining timber. When properly fitted, these joints naturally shed water through geometric design. The tenon typically protruded slightly from the mortise face. This meant water running down the vertical surface would drip off before reaching the joint interface. Even water that penetrated the joint tended to run out through the bottom, preventing pooling that would sustain decay. Wooden pegs that secured mortise and tenon joints were driven at slight angles. This draw-boring technique pulled joints tight mechanically while creating drainage channels. Water entering the joint followed the angled peg holes downward and out, again preventing sustained moisture. Roof design reflected similar thinking. Medieval roofs feature substantial overhangs that keep rain away from wall surfaces. The eaves extended 2 to 4 feet beyond walls, protecting both the wall timbers and the joint between roof and wall structure, where water penetration commonly occurred. Medieval builders also elevated critical timbers above ground contact. Sill, beams, the horizontal members at a building's base, rested on stone foundations that kept wood clear of soil moisture. Even when timbers contacted masonry, builders inserted lead sheets or other barriers to prevent water migration from stone into wood. The sophisticated understanding of water behavior shows in details. Window and door frames had drip edges, slight projections on the underside that forced water to drip clear of the frame rather than running back into the joint. Exterior door sills sloped outward, so water never pooled against the door bottom. These design features weren't decorative. They were functional preservation measures based on accurate observation of how water moves and where decay begins. A building designed to shed water simply doesn't develop the conditions where fungi can establish growth. English churches from the 1300s demonstrate this approach. Their massive oak frames remain sound, not because the wood is magically resistant to decay, but because the design prevents sustained wetting. The joints drain. The surfaces shed water. The timbers remain dry enough that fungi can't grow. If medieval techniques produced timber that lasted centuries, why did modern construction abandon them in favor of chemical treatments that fail in decades? The answer is economics and labor costs. Medieval preservation was labor-intensive. Selecting trees for winter harvest, seasoning timber for years, carefully cutting complex joints, applying tar treatments, all required time and skilled work. In pre-industrial society with low labor costs, this made sense. In modern construction where labor is expensive, it doesn't. Pressure-treating lumber is industrial and fast. Batch processing thousands of board feet takes hours, not years. The chemical treatment happens at centralized facilities using automated equipment. Construction sites receive treated lumber ready for immediate use. No seasoning wait. No careful joinery. Just build. For most modern applications, the 20 to 40-year lifespan of treated lumber proves adequate. Houses get renovated or demolished within that time frame. Decks and fences are considered temporary features. The modern construction mindset accepts replacement as normal rather than seeking truly long-term solutions. The knowledge required for medieval techniques has also fragmented. A medieval carpenter underwent 7-year apprenticeships, learning wood behavior through thousands of hours of direct work. Modern carpenters learn standardized methods in months or years. The deep understanding of wood that enabled medieval preservation has been replaced by industrial processes that don't require it. Building codes and regulations create additional barriers. Many jurisdictions require specific treatments for wood and ground contact or exterior applications. Chemical preservatives have extensive testing and approved uses. Traditional methods like tar or charring lack modern regulatory approval, making their use legally complicated even when technically superior. Insurance and liability considerations also favor modern methods. If treated lumber fails, the manufacturer holds liability. If a traditional preservation method fails, the builder might face claims. The legal structure of modern construction pushes towards standardized, industrially warranted products rather than time-tested techniques without corporate backing. Modern wood preservatives raise environmental concerns that medieval techniques avoided entirely. Copper compounds from pressure-treated lumber leach into soil and water. These compounds accumulate in the environment and can affect plant growth and aquatic organisms. Disposal of treated lumber creates hazardous waste. You can't safely burn pressure-treated wood due to toxic emissions. Landfills accept it reluctantly. The chemicals don't biodegrade quickly. Every deck and fence built with treated lumber becomes a future disposal problem. Medieval preservation methods used entirely natural, biodegradable materials. Tar and oils break down through natural processes. Charred wood is essentially just carbon. It returns to soil as any organic material would. Even smoke-treated timber contains nothing that poses environmental hazard when disposed. The carbon footprint difference is substantial. Producing chemical preservatives requires industrial chemistry, energy-intensive manufacturing, and global distribution networks. Traditional preservation used locally available materials and simple processing that required minimal energy input beyond human labor. Longevity itself carries environmental benefits. Timber that lasts 500 years represents enormous carbon sequestration. The carbon absorbed during the tree's growth remains locked in the structure for centuries. Timber that fails in 20 years and requires replacement represents 5 replacements, 5 times the harvesting, processing, transportation, and installation impacts. Some contemporary builders are rediscovering traditional methods specifically for environmental reasons. Charred siding, natural oil treatments, and careful joinery are appearing in sustainable construction projects. The motivation isn't nostalgia, but recognition that traditional techniques often align better with sustainability goals than modern chemical approaches. You don't need to build a medieval cathedral to benefit from these preservation techniques. The principles apply to contemporary projects with minimal adaptation. For any outdoor woodwork, fencing, raised garden beds, arbors, charring provides excellent protection. A propane torch or careful fire application chars surfaces in minutes. Brush off loose carbon, apply a natural oil if desired, and you've created surface protection that will last decades. The cost is nearly zero beyond the wood itself and minimal labor time. Natural oil treatments work excellently for decks, outdoor furniture, and any application where charring's black appearance isn't desired. Linseed oil, tung oil, or similar products penetrate wood and polymerize to create water resistance. Reapplication every few years maintains protection indefinitely. The materials are non-toxic, environmentally benign, and readily available. The joinery principles apply universally. When building anything wooden outdoors, design for water shedding. Don't create horizontal surfaces where water pools. Use slopes, overhangs, and drainage details that move water away from vulnerable areas. This costs nothing but forethought. For major construction, incorporating medieval principles requires working with builders familiar with traditional methods. Timber frame construction using mortise and tenon joinery, properly seasoned timber, and natural finishes produces buildings that will outlast conventional construction while avoiding chemical preservatives entirely. The trade-off is initial cost and time. Traditional methods require more upfront investment in materials and skilled labor. The payback comes over decades through longevity and minimal maintenance. Whether that makes economic sense depends on your planning horizon and priorities. The Hōryū-ji Temple has stood for 1313 years using wood preservation techniques that required no synthetic chemicals. Medieval European timber frames from the 1200s still serve as homes and businesses. These aren't anomalies. They're proof of concept. Medieval carpenters understood wood at a level modern construction has largely abandoned. They knew when to harvest for optimal properties. They seasoned timber patiently. They used fire, smoke, tar, and oil to create protective surface conditions. Most importantly, they designed structures that prevented water exposure rather than fighting decay after it occurred. These techniques work. The evidence is standing all over the world in structures hundreds or thousands of years old. We can replicate them today using the same materials and methods, or we can adapt the principles to contemporary contexts using modern equivalents. The question isn't whether medieval preservation works. The centuries-old buildings prove it does. The question is whether we value longevity enough to invest the time and care these methods require, or whether we accept planned obsolescence as the price of modern construction efficiency. For most applications, modern methods are faster and cheaper initially. That calculation works if you're thinking in decades. If you're thinking in centuries, the math changes. Medieval techniques produce timber that outlasts the people who installed it, the buildings around it, and often the civilizations that commissioned it. Your garden fence doesn't need to last 500 years. But it could. The knowledge exists. The materials are available. The methods are proven. All that's missing is willingness to work with wood as medieval carpenters did, understanding it rather than overwhelming it with chemistry. The medieval approach wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated understanding expressed through simple means. And it produced results that 21st century technology still can't match for pure longevity and environmental compatibility.